Lastly, I would like to cover the mineral of calcium. And we often know that calcium is very important for our bones to make them strong. And one very important point I want to state is the fact that you really need to start early, like in your teens, getting adequate calcium, because if you don't start the process then, it is difficult to try to make it up later in life. It is important to take in enough calcium so that you have strong bones and prevent osteopenia, osteoporosis formation, and subsequent fractures. Now, there's a lot of other functions that calcium has that many of us are not aware of. So one of those is going to be for brain function, cell-to-cell communication, and blood pressure stabilization. Whenever calcium is released from a cell, it causes an excitatory chemical reaction, and that's really important in a couple of examples I'm going to give. One is through muscle contraction, and another is when the sperm enters the egg and fertilizes it. So calcium is critical in those functions. Now, what dosing should you be on? Well, it's really contingent upon what your age is. The daily dosing of calcium should be 1,000 milligrams per day in the premenopausal age range. If you are postmenopausal and are on hormones, then the dosing should be 1,200 milligrams a day. And if you are postmenopausal but are not taking hormones, it should be 1,500 milligrams per day. The reason being is if you're on hormones, the estrogen is helpful in terms of preventing bone demineralization and thus osteoporosis. There are different kinds of calcium that can be taken over the counter. Calcium citrate and calcium carbonate are the two most common types. And the citrate is probably the least expensive one and is going to be adequate for most people. However, if you are on certain medications such as H2 blockers like Zantac or Pepcid, or protein pump inhibitors, those actually will not be absorbed adequately, so then you will need to take calcium carbonate. Calcium is known to be constipating, so if that is an issue for you, you can add magnesium to it, and that should cancel that out for you. Now, there were some myths that came up regarding calcium and heart disease and how calcium increased the risk of heart disease. But that was only found in one study, and it did not actually include whether or not vitamin D was studied with it, because you really need vitamin D in order to have the calcium absorbed in the body. So ultimately, most of all of the other studies did not show this correlation. So as long as you don't take more than what is recommended, calcium intake is still very critical for all the reasons that I mentioned.